diversify your deployment footprint, so you're not exposed to things like floods and volcanoes. So believe it or not, Seattle's actually a relatively, which is where I'm from, is a relatively risky place to host services because if Mount Rainier blows up, your service is gone and you can't provide services to all your companies. So you spend a lot of time trying to think about how you can put service centers around the world. Like last time I checked, I think Steam we were up there in the top 5. We're a privately held company, so we don't tend to talk a lot about statistics. I think we're like the top 5 internet providers. Steam is bigger than a lot of countries in terms of the services that it provides. And so we tend to put all of our data centers all over. In the same way, New Zealand becomes super attractive because New Zealand has a proven track record of managing disease risk. So it's such an odd thing to think about as a technology company, right? Usually you're used to thinking about like how can we keep the power on?
Is this better?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
You guys like to say yes, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So all of a sudden, one of the things you need to be concerned about are pandemic risks, right? We've had relatively few in most of our memories, but it was obviously a much bigger problem earlier in the 20th century. So I think that a lot of technology companies are going to be asking themselves, what are the places in the world, in the same way where you don't have to worry about, power outages or volcanoes or earthquakes taking down your system, to also think about how you can have a workforce where they're in an environment where they've reliably proven that they're not going to lose the productivity that's associated with lockdown. So when you look at the productivity that Valve has lost during this last year, it's about 25 to 30%, which is a pretty dramatic reduction in productivity. So you'd say, oh, well, we need to make sure we have places where people can work where we're not going to take that productivity hit. So it's a diversification and risk management strategy that's going to apply to employees in the same way you think of it being applied to points of presence and service centers. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes I get excited by my own explanation and then don't figure out whether or not it is actually understandable. So just like, feel free to go.
What do you think will be the next innovation in this industry?
So it's always interesting to try to bet about the futures. So I've made some incorrect bets and some correct bets. Steam is an example of anticipating how you can redesign corporations and various line of business functions given the internet. That there are a bunch of things that you can change in your technology development when you have a much more rapid iteration cycle with your customers. The thing that I personally am most interested in are brain-computer interfaces. And the sort of intellectually lazy way of thinking of it is that the matrix is going to happen a lot faster than people realize. It's actually much more nuanced and complicated. Anybody who does technology development knows that movies trivialize and simplify and obfuscate through all of the interesting details. And it's actually more complicated than that. But so saying that we're going to be able to create things like the Matrix and use that for a wide variety of purposes, including entertainment, is a vast oversimplification of both where we will end up and how we get there. But it's a simple sort of shorthand way of saying that this technology is much further along than people realize, that the science is much more settled for a lot of interesting applications. So a simple example would be you can use like a 1.5 Tesla magnetic field to suppress vertigo in VR, right? So that's like a really, really simple thing that you can do right now. There's no science involved. There's not even a lot of engineering. It's more about shielding the rest of your VR headset. But then there are a bunch of other things that are also really pretty tractable problems right now where you can improve a characteristic called working memory using a number of different stimulation technologies. And working memory translates basically to IQ, right? So the first things you start to see, because we're a gaming company, is that you get better at games faster when you're stimulating the right portion of the brain using an appropriate brain-computer interface. But in general, you'd be making people smarter across the board. Similarly, things like mood, focus, and sleep quality are also practical problems right now. There'll be a variety of invasive and non-invasive technologies that are being done. We're doing some research right now on phased array ultrasound as a way of getting high temporal and spatial accuracy and stimulating deep portions of your brain, specifically the thalamus. But there are a bunch of other ones that are coming, right? So Neuralink is using what's called an ECOG array, is an invasive approach. So all of these different things are going to be competing on the read and write technologies. And then applications will get built on top of that, right? So we may be right about the stimulation and reading mechanisms, or we may be wrong, but we can still build applications that are on top of it. So regardless, that's something that's happening very quickly and will definitely be significant in your lifetimes. So you can easily imagine a scenario where somebody is an air flight controller, and part of that job is essentially to link the space that they're associated with to the part of your brain that controls how it's called proprioception, right? So you very rarely worry about your hand running into your face, right? You have this inherent sense of, I know where everything is, it's a relatively unconscious operation, and that's kind of a good thing when you think about planes flying around. You're like, oh, you don't want your hand never runs in your face by accident, and you want that same kind of process that is being applied to managing a bunch of airplanes flying around in space. That's just an example of some of the industrial applications that will be enabled by and eventually be required to have brain-computer interfaces.
Is Valve willing to support third-party tournaments and LAN competitions like TF2 and CSGO?
Yeah, we do that already with, especially with Counter-Strike. So we sort of have a couple models of either running the tournaments ourselves, like with Dota, or doing almost everything in the community, like we do with Counter-Strike. So both of those models are good models, and it's evolving really rapidly, right? The things that make sense now weren't even predictable 5 years ago. 5 years from now, we assume that everything's going to continue to evolve really rapidly. So we tend not to try to have a bunch of fixed rules and try to let several different gardens grow to see which ones create the most value for gamers.
Who can the community contact at Valve to build an esports relationship with?
You can always send mail to me, Gaben, at valvesoftware.com. I'll probably pass you over to a guy named Bruno Carlucci. He's doing a lot of it. It really depends upon what specifically you want to do on the esports side as to who I'd end up connecting you with. That's how I was invited to this assembly. Somebody sent me mail, and it seemed like a nice neighborly New Zealand thing to do. So it does work to send me emails.
What game are you personally focused on right now?
So as you build things in your career, as you start to be a creator and whatever it is, depending upon the field that you're in, you end up having kind of complicated love-hate relationships with the thing you build. Because when you're building it, you don't ever get to have the fun experience of going down to the game store and buying a game or downloading something on Steam and playing a finished product. So you always are working on it when it doesn't work at all, and it's frustrating and it's broken, and your focus is on everything that's wrong with it, right? So you just have a very different relationship with those things. So, like Half-Life, which is probably the Valve game where the most of the creative and technical decisions were mine, are something that I'm not particularly fond of, not because it isn't a good game, but because I still remember all the compromises and mistakes and failed ambition in that game. So that's not sort of anybody who works on something. Their reactions are going to be very, very different than gamers' reactions. So with that caveat, with that sort of background, I'd say Portal 2 is to me feels like one of our most complete games, right? Like everything worked the way we wanted it to work. The execution was really good. The project itself went well, right? We didn't have any huge disasters. So, but that's from an inside perspective, right? That's from somebody who's working on them. It's like, oh, I get to see, other people's clever ideas rather than be mad at my not clever enough ideas on other projects. So you'll see that yourself, as you are moving into your professional careers, is that, you have a complicated relationship with the things that you're going to build as you go through your endeavors.
What do you think are important qualities for entrepreneurs and game developers?
I think the most important thing is to listen to customers. A question I get asked a lot is how can I get into game development? I always describe the same thing, which is to get into a cycle, right? To get into an iterative cycle where you're building something for a clear customer. A customer could be another developer, a customer could be a real user, it depends on whether you're building tools or end user products. And the key thing is to build something with a clear idea of who that customer is and a way of measuring the consequences of the choices you've made, right? So you need to have a quantitative method to iterate and say, okay, my next piece of work should have this consequence on the metric. And it either succeeds or fails on those. And you'll find that you learn really quickly how to be better as a game developer or as a software developer through that iterative loop. And it's in many ways more important to be in the iterative loop than it is to worry too much about what it is that you're iterating on. It could be a website, it could be an esports tool, it could be a utility for scraping data off of something else. And it's that iteration for a customer in the face of quantitative metrics that's the most important tool that I know. You'll get better faster that way than just any other mechanisms that I know of.
Is Valve planning any major updates for Team Fortress 2?
Yes, we have updates for Team Fortress 2.
Okay, because are you aware of the ongoing bot or hacker crisis?
Oh yeah, we're very, very aware of the problem and I think we have good solutions for it.
All right. Do you think VR and AR technology will pick up the stables of the gaming industry?
There are interesting questions, which is, are things sort of stable end goals or are they transition points? And I actually, my view, which is not in the accepted sort of middle realm, is that VR and AR are transition points towards brain-computer interfaces, that everything you have to do in terms of control schemes, in terms of understanding visual processing, in terms of content design, are leading you towards brain-computer interfaces and what they do. So that's the main thing. And then I think brain-computer interfaces are going to be incredibly disruptive. One of the more disruptive technology transitions that we're going to go through. So I think it's super valuable. We're making big investments in new headsets and games for those application categories, but also looking further down the road and saying, what does that evolve into?
Continuing on about neurotechnology, do you think it has a kind of place in this kind of industry or in any other industry?
Yeah, so I actually think it's kind of you can either get ahead of technology transitions or trail. So typically when a company is successful, it tends to think, oh great, we're successful, we would really prefer it if nothing changed. The movie industry really was very happy with video games. Everybody knows that the video game industry is larger than the the movie industry, right? And there are fundamental reasons for that. People prefer agency and being part of an entertainment experience rather than being passive and a bunch of other stuff. If you don't think about what the impact is of these upcoming transformation between your meat and digital selves, you're going to just get run over when that occurs. I sort of joke that that there's a giant meteor headed towards the gaming industry from great computer interfaces. And we can either plan for it and adopt and internalize it and lead on that, or we'll just get crushed by it when it arrives. So, yeah, I think it's important.
We're running a bit fast on time, so we're going to take some questions from the crowd. You guys have to put your hands up.
Oh my god.
Bring it down.
Do you want me to hold it?
Okay, we got a question from Karen. Are you and the employees of Valve looking to improve CSGO's anti-cheat system?
Improve its what?
Anti-cheat system.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a lot of what the community is doing is going to be based on AI, which is sort of back solving the problem of making sure that people are behaving like humans, not behaving like non-humans. Right? That turns out to be a pretty tractable, fundamental approach. Just as, here's an interesting thing. I don't know if we want to vote. So anyhow, we should have a digital human in about 8 years, right? So that would be something that is able to operate at a superhuman level at any task that a human can do in about 8 years. Does that surprise you, or does that sound about right?
Surprising.
So yeah, so that's a useful milestone to think about. So anything in about 8 years, we should have a computer system, an AI, that could run Valve better than I could, just to be really concrete about it. And there are a bunch of consequences that are going to come out of that. But it also means that we're going to have lots of very helpful. So that's one of the things Elon Musk is worried about. So Elon's interested in great computer interfaces because he doesn't want humans to be left behind. I have sort of more of a Ricardian trade theory about that. But his view is, if we don't figure out how to essentially extend your meat self to include sort of a significant digital component, that humans will get left behind. Well, parity at anything a human can do in 8 years, but then the computers are just going to keep going, right? So in 8 years, the programmers working on AI problems will be AIs, and it'll start to accelerate at an exponential basis. So anti-cheat and Counter-Strike will be one of the easier problems. Maybe it'll be one of the harder problems. We can run Valve in 4 years, but Counter-Strike anti-cheat will take 6. That's the big thing. That's the big thing. Okay, next question.
What games and projects can we expect to see on the Source 2 engine?
Yeah, I can't talk about future games. So. It just creates a nightmare. In the back.
What's your favorite game of all time?
I think one of my favorite games is Nintendo Mario 64. Nintendo 64. The reason I like that game is that it's, in addition to being a really fun game, it's a fantastic learning tool as a game designer. It sort of lays out the structure. It's like a PhD level class in how to design games. It's the same way I really like Pulp Fiction as a movie. It's a good movie, but it's also kind of a love letter to movies and movie making, right? And that's why I sort of put it at the top of my list. So Mario 64 has that quality of both being fun to play, but also teaching you how to do a game design. Right? Playing Mario 64 is actually better than most of the game design classes at universities that I've looked at. So, tell your parents that that's what you're actually. I'm studying for my PhD on playing Mario 64. See if that explanation applies. Over there. Yes? Do I think we'll be hosting TI in New Zealand? No, we won't. We took a run at it and just weren't able to put it together fast. However, and that's for this year, right? But definitely there are a lot of reasons. We've done a bunch of the groundwork to have it that way. I would like to have TI here in New Zealand. It's something I'm working on. Sure, we have.
What was one of the hardest decisions that you have made during your career?
I think delaying the original Half-Life one by a year was probably the hardest decision because all of our reasons to delay it were theoretical. Now we have some of the library of evidence that it would have been a good idea, but at the time we had to believe that delaying and spending a bunch of money that we were running out of was a good idea rather than just shipping the first version of the product. In retrospect, it was a great idea, but at the time it was a very hard decision. There's a question over here.
Why is CSGO getting so expensive?
What is so expensive?
Why is CSGO getting so expensive?
Oh, Ivan.
I'm missing a word. Skins, because they're popular.
We're going to bring it back to the stage. Sorry, guys. I know you're busy. We've got another question from the crowd. Pre-vetted. What tips do you have for general success in life?
I think that people way undervalue the people that they're closest to and the significance of that. The people nearest to you actually are so much more of a determinant of your satisfaction and enjoyment of life. So I just say pay attention to that. People who are just in a good mood and pleasant have more of a superpower than they realize. It sounds like a really weird thing to pick, but it actually matters a huge amount. So after I left Microsoft, I could have retired. But retirement, at least in the United States, is sort of like, oh, now you can get to do what you really enjoy doing. And for me, the thing that I enjoy doing are the people, or building games and technology with the people at Valve that I get to work with. Like working with Robin Walker is incredible. Working with Icebrow is just a huge amount of fun. Right? Every day you go in, they're full of energy, they have great ideas, they're thoughtful, they're great collaborators. And for me, I can't imagine what would be more fun than getting to work with them. So one of the hardest things for me about the last year is just having to have all those kinds of interactions over Zoom rather than being able to do those face to face. That matters a lot, right? More than people realize.
Will Steam be porting any games to consoles, or will it just stay on PC?
You will get a better idea of that by the end of this year.
Good idea.
Say, aha!
Outside of that, what do you like to do in your spare time?
One of the things that's been great about being in New Zealand is getting your scuba diving here in the waters. And we also have a race team, motorsports race team called the Heart of Racing. Originally in the United States, we raised money for Seattle Children's Hospital. While we've been here, we've been working Starship Foundation. We've also been supporting Darren Kelly, who's the reigning D1N at Drift Championship. So motorsports, speak that I've been going to assemblies.
All right. What opportunities in life do you wish you had taken earlier?
I probably should have left Microsoft earlier than I did. So Microsoft was a great company. There was a period where Microsoft was the best company in the world to work for if you were a computer scientist. And then I didn't want to leave Microsoft, but the Microsoft that had sort of inspired me and trained me didn't exist anymore. So Microsoft left, all of us who'd been there. When I left, I think I was 70th in seniority out of like 45,000 people, right? And there just weren't that many of us left from the original days when the business had actually been built, right? And instead, there's a whole bunch of people that never actually built anything. They were just coming in to a world where Windows already existed, Office already existed, and they were coming not to build things anymore, but to sort of take advantage of what had already been created. That was a tough decision, right? I tend to be a very loyal person, so it's hard for me to make that decision. In retrospect, I would say, oh, yeah, you should have done that. That's me.
Do you enjoy the direction VR and AR are going into?
Sure. Yes. I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, Half-Life Alyx is kind of our best statement about what we think the opportunities are. So I think that encapsulates her best thinking on that. And it also informs the decisions we're making about the next generation enhancements for the program.
How does it feel to know your impact in the gaming industry?
I like customers, and I like making customers happy, so I tend to focus that through that lens. Like, I love the fact that people respond well to Dota. I am super bummed that the TF2 Bot crisis is causing people as much frustration and anxiety as it is. So that's what I respond to more than some notion of being an industry funded. It really goes down to what have I done recently to make customers happy, or what am I doing right now to make customers mad.
We're going to wrap this up, so this will be our last question. Do you have any final words for the internet? Any inspirational things?
Potato, cheese. I've never listened to inspirational talk when I was your age. Go! The future's yours! Carpe diem! I mean, it's not an inspirational thing. There's not some magic thing. It's like, pick stuff that you enjoy, work with people that you like, figure out what motivates you. Those are all really important things. It's just part of what you're going through these years as you go off to university or into business.
You're only like past 11.
Talk to your friends, have good times.
Cool. Thank you very much. So let's give Gabe one more clap. So we just have a present from Gabe. Of digital.
Steam gift card.